20 to 8 now. It's Radio Peterborough and PCYR. Very good evening. And also we've got to say a very good evening to Antony Codner from Tailored Auto Enrolment. Hello.
Good evening, David. How are you? Thank you for having me on.
That's all right. It's a pleasure to have you on. Yeah, I'm very good. Thank you. And you?
Yeah, very well indeed. Busy with obviously auto enrolment and everything that brings.
Yes.
Certainly keeping us entertained.
Yes, I can imagine it is. So, there's probably a few people out there that aren't actually aware of what auto enrolment is. Yep. So maybe you can enlighten them.
Yeah, I think auto enrolment, a lot of people will know it as either workplace pensions. It's come under many different guises. The most sort of visible thing you can see at the moment, if you've seen the adverts on TV where you got good old Theo going, "We're in," that is what we're talking about, is those workplace pensions. Now, there's a requirement for every company out there, no matter how big or how small, now to provide a pension for their employees. Yeah. And this has been sort of mooted for quite a while. It was originally brought in by the Labour government, but has been continued by the Conservative government, so it's certainly not going away. And essentially, companies since 2012 have had to set these up. They are contributory, so therefore the company will need to contribute on behalf of the employees as well as the employees.
Yes.
And there is this legal requirement that it has to be in place by a certain date.
Right.
And that date is called your staging date.
Right.
And they were set based on inland revenue data from the 1st of April 2012. Essentially, it's the biggest companies first, moving to the small companies at the back of 2017. New companies also that were set up after 2012 would be right at the end. So by early 2018, every company out there will have set up a pension and be contributing to it on behalf of their employees as well as the employees.
Right. Okay.
So that's sort of it in a nutshell. I think where the sort of main differences sort of lie perhaps to where previous pensions have come in is where normally when you're in a company you would elect to join the scheme. You would have to sign some paperwork or do something to say, I want to go into the company pension scheme. And all of that's sort of gone out the window, and what happens now is everybody is assessed, and if they meet a certain set of criteria, they will be put into the pension without signing a single piece of documentation or a single conversation being had. Okay, so this is something you need to be aware of then, isn't it? Absolutely, and I think there's a lot of responsibility on the employer, as well as obviously at the moment a lack of awareness by employees as to what that actually means. And I think employers obviously at the moment they're starting to get letters now that are saying this is your staging date. So even though the staging dates have already been set, companies will now only get a 12-month sort of warning of when that date will be. And if they don't have their sort of pension in place or their systems in place by that date, there are quite severe penalties, financial penalties, to make sure that this happens. And and I think that's where this is different from what we've seen before. I mean, some people, you'll have obviously listeners who run their own companies who are perhaps aware of what stakeholder pension used to be, and you used to have a stakeholder pension, but it didn't really mean anything. It was generally a certificate on the wall that said, we have a scheme, if you'd like to join it, that's absolutely fine, but we're not actually going to pay anything in it for you.
Yeah, so that's a major difference,
nobody did it. Whereas this time there is a lot more legislation in place, I think because of the failure of stakeholder to sort of ignite the pensions market and get people saving for their retirement. Obviously a more permanent solution was required, and that's where we are today.
Okay, I see. So basically what we've got really is, this is kind of a wake-up call, really, isn't it, to both employees who are being quite apathetic about it, but also to employers who really need to wake up to the fact that they need to get their employees on some kind of pension scheme, this auto-enrolment pension scheme.
Absolutely, and I think the danger is that you can leave it to the last minute and suddenly find, crikey, there's quite a lot to put in place in terms of systems, because it isn't just straightforward, there's a pension, please go in. Every employee has to be assessed by effectively the payroll every time they are paid.
Right.
To assess whether they are eligible to go into the pension. And unfortunately, with any piece of legislation in this country, it's unnecessarily complex.
Well, that sounds just about right, doesn't it, with everything with red tape, doesn't it?
So there's all that sort of stuff that you've got to filter through to try and figure out what needs to be there. Essentially, for the vast majority of people, the criteria for going into the pension automatically is if you earn over $10,000 a year and you're over 22 years of age, or 22 or over, and under state retirement age, that's the group that will automatically be enrolled into a pension scheme the moment their staging date comes along.
Okay.
I mean, there are some technical differences that can happen, but that's essentially the vast majority of people that will fall into that.
Right. Now, does it make a difference as to how long you've been with the company?
No, interestingly, no, it doesn't. I think whereas if you look at even some of the civil service schemes, or even any company private pension where they say, right, you become eligible for the pension after a certain period of service, that doesn't apply here. Essentially, the moment you join the company, if they've already staged, if they already have their pension in place, then they will be assessed the moment they join to see whether they're an eligible job holder to go into the pension scheme.
Right.
There are some cases where that can be delayed for up to 3 months, and that's something that we talk about with a lot of employers when we talk about that. That helps a bit of cost saving. It also helps if you've got seasonal workers who perhaps aren't going to be there for much more than 2 or 3 months, perhaps over the summer period. You can use something to help with that sort of infrastructure. But essentially, the moment they join, yes, they're assessed and they can go into the scheme.
Right. Okay. So, how can you help at Tailored Auto Enrolment? This is obviously that your company is designed to help with that kind of thing, make it a little bit easier for the employees. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we decided. I mean, sort of our background is very much financial services. We're very aware of the pension market. Worked in it for a number of years. With Tailored Auto Enrolment, we set it up as a separate company because it became pretty aware that this was a major issue, and it sort of deserved its own sort of company in its own right to help other companies through what is a real mire of legislation. Our aim is to make auto enrolment as simple and as easy for people as possible, because it isn't simple or easy, but we like to make it look that way.
Okay.
We will deal with any company. When we started, we made the remit that we wouldn't say sort of no to anybody, no matter what their size, because there are a number of companies out there that might say we just want to deal with the larger employers.
Yeah.
Whereas we're aware that the numbers of employers are getting quite large that need to stage. I mean, if we go back to the first year of auto enrolment, there were maybe a couple of hundred companies that needed to stage, but it covered a significant amount of the workforce, because you're talking like Sainsbury's, who employ 180,000 people. Whereas now, we're going the other way around. It's less employees, but more employers.
Right.
So this year, we have 50,000 companies that need to have their pension in place.
Right.
At some point during the next 12 months.
So that's a fairly large number then, isn't it?
Well, compared to, if you imagine that's 50,000 for this year. If you imagine taking that 50,000 and doing all of those every month next year, that's what we're into.
Okay.
So next year it's 600,000 companies that need to be in place.
Wow. Well, that's an impressive number. So you're quite well placed to deal with that then.
Absolutely.
Now you're based in Plymouth, but you're not restricted locally, are you? So
no, not at all. We deal with companies all over the country.
Yeah.
We're not worried where we go. And what we're finding is companies are very much falling into two sort of categories, if you like. You have companies that will look at this as an opportunity and say, actually, do you know, we need to set up a pension. We've been meaning to do it for a while. We want something that's going to attract the right type of employee. So they'll use it as a form of retention and recruitment package, and therefore perhaps want something a bit better than the absolute minimum.
Yeah.
Or you'll have companies who just say, do you know what, this letter's landed on my desk, and I want it off my desk as soon as possible with the least amount of fuss. And there's no right or wrong in it. And for a lot of small employers, it will be quite a burden to get this in place. If they're having to assess their workforce every time they pay them, and you've got companies out there, if they're on a weekly payroll, that's every week, and you need to make sure you have the right software in place to do it.
Right.
And what we do at Tailored Auto Enrolment, because there are all sorts of different solutions out there, but none of them really come together in a sort of cohesive package where you go, do you know, we will take you from having nothing to fully staged, pension in place, all the communications done. And I think the communications are one of the big issues for employers, and also accountants who are perhaps, because accountants have very much become the first port of call for an employer. If you say to them, who you're going to talk to, the likelihood is they say, well, I'll talk to my accountant because they do my payroll, so that's the best person to talk to. And we're working with accountants to make sure that they've got the right systems in place, which we put in for them and work very much with them, to make sure the accountants can offer that solution via us, and they know that way they've maintain their credibility and their professionalism with their employers.
Gotcha. So how do we get in touch with you? If there's a listener who says, I could really do with some help with the auto enrolment, what's the best way to get in touch with you guys?
Well, a number of ways, usual sort of ways. We've got obviously our website, which is just www.tailoredautoenrolment.co.uk.
Yep.
You go onto there, there's a wealth of information about auto enrolment generally. So we've got obviously email addresses on there, contact telephone numbers. You can call us direct to the office, which is 01626 777 934. Emails on the website. Get in touch, and no matter how small you are, we have a package to suit everybody, and that's every pocket as well, because we're aware for a large company it might be quite expensive to put it into place depending on what they're after. Whereas a small company, it is another financial burden at a time where companies have found it difficult, and they're looking at this saying, right, not only have I got to start paying into a pension, I've got to pay to set it up. So we made sure that everything we do can do that as cost effectively and as smoothly as possible, to make sure the company can actually just get on with what they do.
Yeah.
And we leave as little a footprint, if you like, as possible, so they just go, wow, that was easy.
Yeah.
The reality is it probably wasn't.
But you're doing the work rather than them.
Yeah, but we've made it that way.
Great stuff. Well, Tony, thank you very much for talking to us this evening.
You're welcome.
Stay on the line, because we'll get some details about how we get the recording of this off to you.
Fantastic.
I think that's probably given a lot of people some insight as to what they need to do as a part of the enrolment for the pension, whether they're an employee or an employer.
Yep.
So, Tony Codner from Tailored Auto Enrolment, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you, David.
All right, thank you. Very welcome.
Peterborough, all we do is just for you.